Hey girl, welcome to Beat Infertility, a podcast where we get real about infertility, empower you to take back control, and provide you with hope for the future. Ready? Here's your host, Heather Human.
Hello, so glad you're here. We've got a great show for you today. Really quick before I introduce today's guest, if you or someone you know has an infertility success story, I'm looking for more guests to interview. As I'm sure you've noticed, it's first name only, and everyone has walked away feeling really great about telling their story, even if they were initially worried about doing so. To share a success story, please fill out the form at beatinfertility.co/contact. One more quick announcement. To help cover the cost of producing this show, I will now be accepting donations. If you like the show or this episode in particular, please consider making a one-time or ongoing donation. For more information, go to beatinfertility.co/donate. Today's guest is Nicole. Before she was even ready to start trying to have children, she was diagnosed with Fragile X, a genetic condition that can be passed on to one's children and often results in diminished ovarian reserve for the woman. After trying IVF with her own eggs first, she quickly moved on to an egg donor and had 2 children as a result of frozen embryo transfers. Take a listen. Hi, Nicole. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Heather. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, I am too. As we were just saying before the recording, you have a great story that people have been requesting. So I'm really excited about getting to the bottom of it.
Excellent. So I'm always happy to share the information. It will help other people.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's start at the very beginning. Tell me about when you first started on your infertility journey. When did you start trying to have a baby, and when did you know you needed help?
Well, that all sort of came crashing upon me pretty quickly and early on. What happened was I was engaged to my now husband, Chris, and we discovered that there was Fragile X in my family. And so I went to get tested thinking, okay, this will help me understand about, future potential issues, and discovered that indeed I'm a carrier of Fragile X. And we knew that had some implications for future childbearing and so on. So when I got my test results back, my OB suggested that I go see a reproductive endocrinologist and gave me a referral. And I was like, all right, well, that's kind of weird. I don't really understand why I'm going to see an infertility doctor, but all right. So I went, and they did all kinds of tests and so on. And Chris and I were expecting that sort of the worst news that we were going to hear was, oh, well, if you guys ever want to have kids, you should probably do it sooner rather than later. Right? Little did we know that all of a sudden the doctor said to me, you're pretty much never going to have biological children. And we were totally blindsided. We didn't see that coming at all. We didn't, there was so little information about Fragile X out there at the time that we didn't even realize that was sort of a potential situation. So this all happened right before we got married, actually. So we said, well, let's, not deal with this for a little while. We kind of put that all on hold for about 6 months. But then so very shortly after we got married, we kind of jumped right into the whole infertility treatment world.
So for people who don't know, tell us a little bit more about Fragile X and what that kind of diagnosis means.
So Fragile X, well, there are a couple of things. First of all, one of the side effects of being a carrier is primary ovarian insufficiency. So it was likely that we would have a lot of difficulty conceiving regardless, just because I wasn't producing eggs or releasing eggs. Then second to that is that even if I were to get pregnant, there's a high chance of having a child who's affected. And an affected child can range anywhere from a child with maybe slight learning disabilities all the way up to severe, mental retardation and so on. And that boys are more likely to be affected than girls because it's carried on the X chromosome, et cetera. So now they can do relatively simple tests to check embryos and so on for Fragile X, but this was several years ago and they couldn't do that. This was all very cutting edge. So we actually there were only 2 doctors in the world at the time who were working on being able to test embryos for Fragile X. And we worked with them for 6 months. We had blood samples being shipped internationally and all kinds of crazy things. And they ultimately told us, we're not at that point yet. We can't diagnose it yet. In an embryo, the best we can do is do gender selection. And you could know that if you're having a girl, she'll likely be less affected than a boy would be. So that was kind of all the information we had at that time.
Gosh, I imagine that must have been so overwhelming. How were you feeling at this point?
We were overwhelmed. Like I said, we weren't even at the point where we had intended to start trying to have kids. So yeah, we were pretty overwhelmed by the whole thing. And we jumped right into IVF at that time, which we can talk a little bit more about why we made that decision and so on. But I think in hindsight, that served us well because we hadn't gone through all those years that many people go through of, trying Clomid and then trying IUIs and then finally kind of getting to IVF and being emotionally and financially drained at that point. We kind of were fresh. We still, I don't think, really kind of grasped everything that was going to be happening and jumped right in. So I guess there were some benefits to that as well.
Now, you mentioned being referred to an RE right away. Is that someone you stuck with, or did you end up having to change one or more times?
We stuck with him, and he was amazing. Sadly, he has since passed away, but he was just the most incredible doctor, and we totally connected with him, and we had full faith in all his recommendations and advice. And at the time, I didn't realize how lucky we were to have that. I now help run an infertility support group, and I have for many years. So I've heard so many stories of people who are unhappy with their doctors and switch doctors. And, that just adds a lot of stress to an already stressful situation. And then if they don't do it, they might look back and say, well, should I have? Might this have worked if I didn't, So again, I didn't realize at the time how fortunate we were to have him and to have that relationship with him, but it really served us so well.
Well, gosh, I mean, that's amazing because like you said, so many people, myself included, have had to switch doctors. And anytime you get any sort of good news in this process, you have to celebrate it.
Right. That's true.
So, okay, let's talk about the actual treatment then. You said you went straight to IVF. Tell me about all of that.
Yeah, so the doctor said you basically have less than 0.5% chance of having a biological child. And I always joke that, you'd think that would sound close to zero for most people, but not to us. We were going to do that. And so we jumped right in and still we had the health issues to consider. But again, I think we were just so kind of in a fog about everything that was happening. So we jumped right in, and I was 31 years old at the time. And they put me on the most aggressive protocol that they had. They told me it's normally what they would have put a 45-year-old woman on. And they did kind of that first check at day 7 to see if there were any follicles and how things were going and so on. And they told me there's nothing happening. It's as if you're not on any medication, and they cancel the cycle, which was devastating, of course. But I mentioned how we had been working with those doctors to try to see if there was any way, if we did get embryos, to test them for Fragile X. And that process took about 6 months. So we had, when I say we jumped in, it was the first thing we did, but we had those 6 months to kind of have other options circling in the back of our minds and starting to figure out where we were going to want to go from there if it didn't work.
Okay, so where did you go from there then, if that wasn't working out?
So what we decided to do was to pursue egg donor. So we had been thinking about that for a while. We didn't really give adoption, I think, sort of its fair chance, if you will, because I believed a lot of myths that are out there about adoption, which I have since come to learn are completely untrue. So we didn't really explore that, I think, as much as we should have. Not that I regret our decision in any way. But so we decided at that point to pursue egg donor.
So like I said at the very beginning of this interview, a lot of people have been requesting stories about donor situations. So whether that's egg donor, sperm donor, embryo donor. So tell us a little bit about how that process works.
Okay, well, again, my children are now 12 and a half and almost 11. So this was a long time ago, and it's very different now. But how it worked for us, we had the choice, and people still have this choice, to either go through our doctor's office and have them kind of handle everything and do more of an anonymous match, or we could sign up with an agency where we would have online access to all kinds of profiles of potential donors, and we could select our own and that sort of thing. We chose to go through our doctor's office and do it that way. I think we just needed somebody else to make some of these decisions for us. We felt like we were handling so much as it was. And it was also a more cost-effective approach. So we did that. So we filled out a whole questionnaire about ourselves and what was important to us in a donor and so on. And we waited probably about 3 months or so. And then they called us and said, we think we have a potential match here. They actually faxed. They still did that then, and I was at my office, so I had to go stand by the fax machine to make sure nobody else would see the fax. But they faxed over the birth mom's kind of social and medical history and so on. And then, we had time to review that and to make a decision if we were going to accept that match, which we ultimately did.
And what kind of paperwork do you have to fill out for that? I'm sorry if that's like a really stupid question. I've never done this before.
Yeah, well, like I said, you have to fill out a questionnaire with kind of your parameters, what you want in the donor, and kind of distinguishing between your must-haves and your nice-to-haves. And then you also have to go through a psychological assessment, which was really valuable. I mean, it's really just speaking with a therapist about a lot of the issues related to parenting a child through donor egg, that we might not have thought about going in, and getting the chance to work through a lot of those things up front. We also actually found an egg donor specific support group, which we couldn't have gone through the process without that. That was extremely helpful. But back to your question. So it was some paperwork, contracts, and the psychological evaluation were really, what had to be done to shift from IVF to egg donor.
Okay. Yeah. That was sort of the part I was getting at. How, I guess for lack of a better way of putting this, how the egg owner releases parental rights and how that sort of works.
Yeah. So she goes through a lot on her end too, not only, of course, the medicine and the medical end of it. She also has to go through psychological evaluation, and that's actually much more rigorous than what we went through. She had to do sort of official evaluations and tests and things like that. And then also just the legal paperwork, basically stating that she doesn't have any parental rights. It's sort of akin to donating blood, if you will. I know that's a simplistic analogy, but that's kind of what the legal paperwork states, that there are no ongoing rights to this genetic material, as they call it.
So beyond the cost of a traditional IVF cycle, what are the extra costs involved in using an egg donor?
You have some additional medicine costs. It's not double, because as the recipient, you're not going through the whole process of having to go create the eggs and go through a retrieval and, that sort of thing. But you do need medicine to kind of prepare your uterine lining to accept the embryo. And you're also paying for the medicine that the donor needs to go through sort of the regular IVF cycle all the way up and through the retrieval. So there's a slight increased cost in medication. And then, really kind of the same with the monitoring, right? Because they're not doing double the monitoring, but they do have 2 different people. And so there's a little bit more monitoring in terms of going in for regular ultrasounds and things like that. The big difference in cost is the donor egg fees. So the donor gets paid. That varies significantly throughout the country and throughout the program and so on, anywhere from $3,000 to possibly maybe $20,000. So depending on the program that you're going through, whatever the egg donor fees are, that's going to be the big chunk of additional money.
So it's a little bit of a misnomer that they call them a donor.
I guess, and there are some places where they don't get paid for it, but they're not necessarily getting paid for the eggs. They get paid for going through the process. They're going to get their payment as long as they stick to the protocol and do what they need to do, whether they produce 0 eggs or 35 eggs, right? So they're not getting paid sort of for the eggs. They're getting paid for their time and energy and medical risk and all those other things that they're doing.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. So going back to my knowledge of a traditional IVF cycle, we knew what we were going to be spending pretty much anyway ahead of time. We had all the medication calculated out. We, of course, knew what our clinic was charging for the cycle. Is it that clear cut with a donor cycle?
It is. It's very much the same. They lay out, just as you probably kind of got a sheet showing, exactly what everything covers and when it's due and so on. It's the exact same thing, just for going through that first piece of the cycle. It's for her instead of for you, plus the donor egg fees. So it's all very clear.
Got it. And does the clinic determine the fees or does the donor?
The clinic does. So, the donor can decide which clinic she's going to go through or which egg donor program she's going to go through. But once she's in that program, that organization is, they usually have their flat fee with that. And, and I think it's important to note, though, that, and it's part of the psychological screening, that the finances are not the primary motivation for these women. Because if it were, I think you'd have a lot more donors who drop out during the course of the cycle, because it is so draining on them medically and physically and with their time and so on, that they really need to have a much more altruistic, I think, motivation. And that's part of what they're screening for when they are screening them. So the money is kind of a really nice perk for them, but it's rarely the primary motivation.
That makes complete sense. And I definitely wasn't trying to indicate that she wasn't an altruistic person.
Right.
It just, when you hear donor, especially, you brought up blood donor, you don't think of money exchanging hands.
Right.
But yes, having been through 7 IVF cycles myself, it is very draining. I wish we could all receive a little bit of compensation.
Wouldn't that be nice?
So, if you can remember back then to your first cycle with her, how did that go, if you remember all the stats?
Yeah, I don't remember all the specifics, but I can certainly give you general information. The first cycle with her, she did great. In fact, all our friends in our support group joked that she was the Easter Bunny because she provided so many eggs. And I think it was something like 32 eggs or something like that, the vast majority of which fertilized and did well. I think like 27 of them or something. It was just a lot. Of course, I say sarcastically, my body was not cooperating and my uterine lining was not where it needed to be. And the doctor said at the time, he said, look, normally based on your uterine lining, we would cancel this cycle, but we have so many embryos. We know we're going to have plenty for frozen cycles. So let's just give it a shot and see what happens. So they did. And not surprisingly, that cycle failed. But we had so many frozen embryos that we were able to go forward, and we didn't need to have her go through any more cycles. So then when you go through the frozen cycles, it's just like a regular IVF going through a frozen cycle. So it's a lot less expensive and a more simplistic process, because also with the donor, you're trying to time everything. You're trying to time your body with her body and so on, and it's pretty tricky. But with the frozen cycle, you don't have to do that. So they said, look, we can just keep doing what we need to do till we get your lining to where we need it, even if that takes a little bit longer than it might normally take. And then just when we're ready, we can thaw and transfer. So ultimately, that's what was successful for us.
So sticking with that first cycle for a second, and if you don't remember, that's totally fine. I'm going to ask anyway, because it's a question that we get commonly in the private Facebook group. But do you remember how thin your lining was, that they determined that it was too thin?
I don't remember for sure. And if I said a number, I could be so wrong. I would hate to misguide people. I really don't.
Okay, that's fine. Like I said, I thought I'd throw it out there just in case.
Right.
I tend to remember all the numbers, so like I said, I was going to take a chance. Okay, so moving forward with the frozen cycles, how many did it take for you guys to get it working?
Okay, so basically the key thing, was my lining. So with the first frozen cycle, they just said, we're going to kind of keep getting you ready till we think that you're ready. So we did the first cycle. Back then, they transferred a lot more embryos than they would ever do these days. And also, these days there's great success rates with frozen embryos. They weren't quite so high back then. So they would also transfer more because of that. So they transferred 4 embryos.
Oh my.
I know. In hindsight now, I say, oh my.
Now you're like, whoa.
I know. And, at the time you're like, woohoo, let me have twins and be done. But so we just got so lucky that we got pregnant with 1 baby during that cycle. And then we went back not all that long afterwards for, after we had our daughter to do it again. And we still had plenty of frozen embryos left over. So that cycle worked too, which was fabulous. So, in that time, it was funny because we went in for the transfer and they asked us, do you want us to transfer 2 or 3? And nobody had ever asked us before. They'd always just told us what they were doing. So we hadn't had any of those conversations. Here I am on the table and they're asking this question. So, we just said 3, right? Because we really want to get pregnant. And again, thank goodness, in hindsight, we got pregnant with a single baby again, and had our son. So one of our things that we it's our inside family joke with our kids, is that they're technically twins because they were conceived on the same day, even though they were born 19 months apart.
That is so cool. And obviously with the same batch of eggs and everything. So
Yep, exactly.
That is funny. I like that. So you've now changed careers since going through all of this. Tell me a little bit about that. What convinced you to do it, how you made the leap, all of that.
Yeah, well, as I'm sure you know, and everybody who's been through this, it's such a life-changing experience. And I wasn't happy in my work. I worked in very large companies, and I was pretty successful at what I did, but I was never happy with it. And I always felt like I wanted to do something that mattered, that made a difference in people's lives. And after going through all of this to have my children, I couldn't stand the thought of being away from them so much for, just for a paycheck, just for a job that I wasn't happy with and didn't feel like I was adding any value to the world with. So I decided to make the leap and change careers. And now for the last 10 years, I've been an adoption consultant. Like I mentioned, I'd learned a lot about adoption, just being involved with infertility support groups and so on. And I learned that, wow, a lot of those things that we believed about it that kept us from considering it really aren't true. And it really is a great option. And I just felt that people need to understand this and they need to know, that it is an option. I mean, like I said, I certainly never regret the path that we took, which gave us our 2 amazing children. But it would have been nice at the time to have felt like we had other options, and to explore other things. So that's what led me down the path. So now I have an adoption consultancy, and I tell people I'm kind of like a wedding planner for adoption. I guide people step by step through the whole process so that they can adopt quickly and safely, and ideally with as little stress as possible.
I love it. Well, we actually, by the time this airs, our adoption episode will have just come out.
Oh, great.
So you should listen and share and all of that.
Yes, for sure.
So you've also gotten heavily involved with Resolve since all of this.
Yes. So I was involved kind of going through the process myself. And then we relocated down to the Tampa area shortly, actually while I was pregnant with my son. So I was looking for a group here to volunteer with and to help. And to my surprise, discovered that there wasn't a group here. And it just so happened that there were a couple of other women who were also looking to help volunteer with a group, that we somehow all got connected and said, hey, we should start a group in Tampa. So we did. And that was 7 or 8 years ago now. And so me and one of the other women are still running it.
Is it easy to start a Resolve chapter?
Yeah, it really wasn't. It wasn't overly complex. We had to find space and we had to get the word out. But we were fortunate because with all of our careers, I'm an adoption consultant. One of the other women who I still run it with is infertility therapist. One of the other women who started it with us was an acupuncturist, and the other was a nurse. So we had connections to the whole infertility community, all the REs in the area, the other therapists, et cetera. So it was pretty easy for us to get the word out and to have people, share information with their patients and that sort of thing. So it was just a matter of, picking the day and the time and the topics and sharing the information, and getting a decent meeting space was probably our biggest challenge.
That's awesome. And I love that you guys had a group of people who were all doing different things, but in sort of the same realm. That's amazing.
Yeah, it really helped, I think the whole process. In the beginning, we used to bring in a lot of speakers for our meetings on different topics. So again, having all those connections helped with that a lot. But ultimately, we've just evolved to, just pure sort of support group and conversations.
So now going back to when you were actually going through this process and there was a lot of waiting because your lining wasn't cooperating, how were you coping with everything?
Well, like I mentioned, we found that donor egg specific support group, and that was an absolute lifesaver for us because, we did go to some general support groups before that, but we weren't getting what we needed out of that. We felt there were a lot of people in there who were maybe going to have great success using Clomid or doing IUI or doing IVF. And we felt like, yes, they're going through a hard time too, but once they're pregnant, this is sort of all behind them, right? But we felt for us, this is a lifelong issue, thing that we're going to have, that we have to talk to our children about, that, it doesn't just go away once we get pregnant. And not that infertility doesn't change people who struggle through IVF and so on, but in terms of, having to have ongoing regular conversations with our children, make sure it's something they understand, that they're comfortable with, that we had different obstacles or issues to be working through than people who might just get pregnant with their own genetic material. So that group just wasn't sort of fulfilling those needs. And so we kind of came across this donor specific group, and it was about 5 or 6 couples in the group. And that was just so fantastic because we all had, the same issues, the same questions, the same needs and so on, and we were all kind of pretty much at the same place in the process. It just ended up being an incredible group, and it was run by a therapist. So we, of course, also had her expertise. I'm still in contact with her. I just had lunch with her a couple of weeks ago. So we had kind of both the professional angle and then the personal support. And one of the other couples from there who also had 2 children are still some of our best friends, which is great. And so our kids know other kids that came through egg donor. So it's not as sort of this unusual thing for them. So it had incredible benefits at the time, but even ongoing for us.
Was this just a local group, or is this something national with chapters that other people can join?
It was just a local group, and it just so happened, that there was this one therapist who at the time was starting an egg donor group, and it kind of got announced at one of the Resolve meetings that we were in, and we all just went and did it. And she's done it herself, over the years here and there whenever she's had enough interest, but it's just her kind of private group.
Got it. Okay. Well, one last question before I let you go. What words of hope would you offer to someone who's at the beginning of their infertility journey right now?
I would say that if you want to be a parent, you will be a parent. There are ways, there are options. Some of them are easier than others. Some of them have bigger obstacles than others, but you will ultimately be a parent. And once you become a parent, you won't care so much about how you got there. A lot of the struggles that I had about mourning that biological connection and so on, now I look back and I say, yeah, I get why that was important to me at the time, but I also wonder what I thought was so fabulous about my DNA, when I look at the kids that I have. So all those things that seem like you'll just never be able to get past them, you will, and they'll become less and less important with time. And there are just so many different options and ways to become a parent that you will achieve that goal.
Nicole, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Today's woman we're following is Stacy, who you might remember from episode 22. She was diagnosed with endometriosis, ovarian cysts, and a luteophase defect. Over the years of trying timed intercourse and IUI, she's had 2 miscarriages. She recently completed her first IVF retrieval cycle. Here's her update. Hey, Stacy, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Heather. Happy to be back.
Yeah, anxious to hear an update from you. So last time where we left off, you were about ready to start IVF. So let's pick up there.
We started our IVF treatment end of October, beginning of November. We started stems around October 21st. So after one day of stems, we get a call from our doctor's office saying, hey, your insurance denied the claim for IVF. And we're like, what? That was a total shock. And there were some tense moments. Even though they had pre-approved us, they tried to say that we hadn't done enough IUI cycles to justify jumping into IVF. So that was quite interesting. Ended up working out. Our doctor had to do a peer-to-peer review. So that was pretty intense. Not really something you want to hear after you start stems the day before.
Right.
So
what is a peer-to-peer review, just so the rest of us can be informed?
So basically, like, the insurance was like, well, we're going to have to talk to your doctor. They pair my doctor up with a doctor that works for them. And the way my doctor explained it, he was like, the toughest part isn't going to be explaining why I know you need IVF. It's going to be talking to this other doctor who could be a pediatrician. He could be an OBGYN. Like, he could be anything. And to basically explain the story without offending someone and really explaining it medically without coming off as if he knows better, it's just weird. So that was pretty tense. And I was like, relying on his expertise and ability to convince them. But I had a cyst on my right ovary. I think it was like a 25 millimeter cyst that he knew previously it wasn't going to affect follicle growth and that stuff. So it actually, this is crazy, but I think it actually kind of ended up working out in our favor because our doctor was like, look at this cyst. She's already done multiple cycles, has been canceled because of cyst. The fact that you guys just wanted to do 3 more rounds of IUI just so you can check the box isn't going to solve anything. And obviously the research shows that after 3 rounds of IUI, if you're unsuccessful, you're unlikely to be successful just doing 3 more at that point.
Right. So, and cysts were definitely a problem for me doing IUI as well. So
frustrating.
Yes. Well, okay. Well, I'm glad the insurance stuff worked out. I mean, the insurance stuff is hard enough as it is. And then you think you're totally approved to pull the rug out from under you. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, and they pre-approved us. The doctor's office checked with them multiple times, and we have a really good billing girl at the clinic, and she's kind of like a bulldog and was like, this is crazy. You've never mentioned this. I've never had this problem before. This is the point of a pre-approval process, so you can tell your patients and customers these things, and it was never relayed to us or them, so it's pretty stressful. It all worked out in the end.
Okay, so after you got through the insurance debacle, what was next?
So we did stems for 11 days. Everything was fairly easy, not to downplay anything, but I don't know, I didn't think the shots were I think I just built it up in my mind as being a lot worse than it actually was. It really wasn't anything too terrible. Every time we'd go in, it was pretty much like textbook. Everything looks great. You have great follicle growth. Your labs, your numbers are where they need to be. So we were like, man, this is a piece of cake. So we did the trigger shot and we went in for a retrieval 2 days later, which was November 3rd. And just to back up, like, I don't know how other clinics do it. Mine never said, like, we're expecting X amount of eggs or you have this many follicles. Obviously, I saw in the ultrasounds how many follicles there were, and I could see on the patient portal, how much data had been collected. And so they never really gave us an idea of how many we should expect. So I don't know if that kind of skewed our expectations. We're waiting for the doctor to come back after the egg retrieval, and he's like, okay, you got 8. And we're like, 8? I was expecting like 15 or 16, and he's like, well, I could only get 2 on the right side because of your cyst, which he was able to drain the cyst. He's like, no, I'm happy with 8. I think that's a good number. It's all about expectations and, definitely managing your expectations. That was a lesson, and had never gone through this. I just didn't know what to expect.
Well, and it's hard not to compare yourself to all the other stories you hear online, right?
Totally.
You hear people getting 20, 30.
Right.
And when you get 8, you're like, well, what's wrong with me? But
8. I'm like, everything's gone so well up until this point. What do you mean only 8? Yeah, it was kind of weird, but it all worked out. So they called the next day and they were like, 7 are mature and fertilized. We did ICSI. It's kind of like a standard at our clinic. We were pleased with that. The lab actually called us every other day. So our next update around day 3, she called and was like, 3 or 4 look better than the others, I'll call you. I think that was on a Friday. So she was like, I'll call you on Monday with the final update. That Monday, we finally get the call. And fun fact is that it was like 2 hours after we normally got the call. I'm like, what is going on? This is killing me. I'll do shots any day over waiting for results. She called and was like, yep, you have 2 embryos. And I'm like, 2? Again, like I'm thinking 3 or 4. Not to mention we opted to do the PGS testing. So I'm thinking like, is it even worth it with 2 at this point? Like I don't know. And she was like, they look really good. One's day 5, one's day 6. So we'll be shipping them off for biopsy today. So we just kind of were like, okay, we'll wait to hear. They told us it can take like 2.5 weeks to get the results back from the genetic testing. So again, waiting. We actually got the call this past Wednesday. One embryo is genetically normal. The other one is called no amp, which basically means that it's not good or bad. They just couldn't get a reading on it, that there just wasn't enough genetic material. He wasn't very clear on how this happens or why it happens. It happens in about 10% of the time. He said some patients end up using those and they work out fine. I think for sure we'll start with the one that we know is genetically normal and freeze the other. And our transfer date is set for January 15th.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
I totally get you about the attrition rate and them dropping off. And, the whole thing feels like a crapshoot.
Right. I know.
But at least you have confirmed the one is genetically normal. And that's amazing. I think that's really, really great news.
Yeah, we were pumped. And just to get the news, because I'm like, is this going to have to drag on after the holidays? I just really want to know either way. So yeah, we're definitely thrilled. And, I think in my mind, I just always pictured we'd have 3 or 4 frozen, they'd all be normal. But I just feel like, and, advice that I've gotten from the Facebook group too, is that this is nature doing its thing. And there's a reason why they don't all make it. And that, you're definitely weeding out the not best quality, not best embryos. And I think it actually ends up working out in our favor because it's not like we're going to have all these extra embryos that we don't know what to do with and we're going to have to make really tough decisions. I think this is the perfect, obviously everything happens for a reason. This is where we were meant to be.
I love that. I mean, that's a great way to look at it. And
yeah.
You have one super duper awesome embryo and just focus on that. There are so many negative things that you could focus on in this process.
Right.
I mean, there's no shortage of that, but you gotta focus on the positive stuff in order to keep yourself sane.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're super excited. So now just I'm like, we're parents now. I was picking on my husband the other day. I'm like, you can't text and drive because he's terrible about that. I'm like, we have babies now. You have to think about, our babies now. It's ridiculous.
That's awesome.
So yeah, we're super excited.
Okay, so January. Have they told you about your frozen embryo protocol yet? Do you know what you're going to do and when you're going to start and all that?
Yeah, they sent over the calendar. I started birth control this week. So I'll do the Lupron and remember what else, the estrace. I don't know. I looked at the calendar briefly, but that will start at the end of mid-December. And it kind of was a crapshoot because of where the holidays fall. I'm thinking that's why they had to push it till January because I don't think the hospital will be open for transfers during the week of Christmas. So a little bit longer of a wait, but hey, well, at least we'll get through the holidays, not have to worry about it and just enjoy the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So are you looking at early January then, it sounds like?
Yeah, January 15th will be the transfer. And then I think we do the pregnancy test on the 24th. So.
Okay. Well, honestly, it'll probably be here before you know it. I feel like the holidays go by really, really fast.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's crazy that we started this whole process back in August and it's already November. So I'm like, it'll fly by.
Exactly. Well, I'm so glad to hear you're really pumped, and I cannot wait to do our next update at the end of January.
Oh, me too. So exciting.
So do you have anything else going on? Are you guys, I don't know, doing any sort of special diets or anything, to prep for the transfer?
No, but thanks for putting me on the spot.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're just taking it easy, not stressing, enjoy the holidays, spend time with friends and family. I totally should be exercising and dieting, so maybe now that you called me out, I will.
I did not mean to lead this into a peer pressure situation.
Okay. Yeah,
No, I just know that, I mean, I didn't do anything special before my transfers either. The only thing that I did was I started acupuncture. Whether or not that helped, I have no idea. But like, that's the only thing that I changed. So there you go. I didn't do anything crazy either. So
okay, good to know. I know in the acupuncture, I've done it before in the past. I enjoyed it. Yeah. So I don't know, maybe we'll do it. I'll do it again. We'll see.
Do you have a place that's near you? That was my biggest problem. Like, our acupuncture place is more than an hour away. And like, when you got on traffic, I feel like the stress of getting there and back, like sort of, I ended up with a negative result, you know?
Yeah,
I'd relax during the appointment, but
I mean, and you live in a pretty major area, right? It's not like you live in the sticks.
I know. Well, but there's just not that much, I don't know. It's just not an acupuncture friendly area, I guess. So
yeah.
And I live south of the city. So, and you know, all the places are north. So I have to go around the city and yeah. So.
Jeez.
I know. No fun. Well, if you do acupuncture, that's like, I don't know, that's one of the more popular things to do, I guess, before transfers. And they have this, I feel like it's called like the German protocol or something, where you go right before your transfer and then go again right after your transfer. So 2 appointments in the same day. Mm-hmm. And then 1 3 to 5 days later.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So something to ask about. Yep.
Maybe that'll make the perfect Christmas present. Like, husband, you know, yes. This will benefit both of us.
Exactly. Well, Stacey, thank you so much for providing your update, and I can't wait to hear from you again at the end of January.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Beat Infertility. Sign up to receive email updates at beatinfertility.co and join our private Facebook group at beatinfertility.co/Facebook. If you know someone else dealing with infertility, please fill out the form at beatinfertility.co/support, and we'll send a personal invitation to join our community. We would love to be a part of their support system. Join us next time on Beat Infertility. Until then, baby does to you.